The wrench slipped from his hand the moment he heard it. Two small voices screaming down the dirt road. "Mister, please help, our dad's not waking up." Connor West froze beside his rusted Ford, oil dripping from his fingers, heart pounding against his ribs. The 36-year-old former Marine turned toward the sound, and there they stood, two little boys in matching blue pajamas, barefoot, their faces streaked with tears. One clutched a worn teddy bear, the other could barely catch his breath between sobs. This wasn't how Connor had planned to spend his Thursday afternoon at Westside Mechanics, the small auto shop he'd built from nothing on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. 3 years after losing his husband Parker in a car crash, Connor's life had found a fragile rhythm, raising their son Jamie, keeping the garage afloat, and ignoring the sideways glances from neighbors who still whispered about the gay mechanic raising a boy alone. Where Connor knelt down, wiping his hands on his faded jeans. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly, noting their identical features. They were twins, maybe 7 years old. "Where's your dad?" The slightly taller boy pointed toward a small trailer at the edge of the lot. "In there, he won't wake up. We tried everything." Something in Connor's chest tightened, a familiar dread. He grabbed his phone and sprinted, boots crunching gravel as he ran toward the weathered trailer. Inside, the air smelled of medication and something sour. A man lay slumped against the couch, pale as moonlight, his lips tinged blue. Connor dropped beside him, pressed 2 fingers to his neck. A pulse faint but there. "What's his name?" Connor asked the twins who hovered in the doorway. "Michael," the younger one whispered. "His name's Michael." Connor nodded, checking his breathing while dialing 911. "I've got an unresponsive male. Breathing shallow. Pulse weak. Trailer off Route 14 by Westside Mechanics." His voice remained steady even as his mind raced with memories of another emergency call 3 years ago, one that ended with Parker never coming home. When the ambulance arrived, red and blue lights flashing across the dusty field, Connor found himself promising the boys he wouldn't leave them alone. Their wide, frightened eyes reflected a vulnerability he recognized all too well in Jamie after the accident. That night, watching the twins in the hospital waiting room, clinging to each other like they might fall apart if they let go, something in Connor shifted. He knew he couldn't just go back to his empty garage and pretend it wasn't his concern, because kindness wasn't about convenience. It was about who you refused to abandon when the world turned its back. If Connor had known how this single act would change his life forever, how it would challenge everything in his small southern community, threaten his livelihood, and ultimately rebuild what grief had shattered, would he still have reached out his oil-stained hand to those 2 frightened boys? Perhaps some choices aren't choices at all, but moments when our hearts recognize their own purpose. Have you ever found family in unexpected places? Share your story in the comments below, and subscribe to Heart Stories for more moments of courage, compassion, and unexpected connections. The fluorescent hospital lights buzzed overhead as Connor leaned against the vending machine, a paper cup of coffee cooling in his hands. He'd driven behind the ambulance all the way to Atlanta General, his old pickup coughing smoke the whole way. Through the glass window, he watched the twins sitting side by side in the waiting area. Mason, the older one by 4 minutes, had his arm protectively around Aiden, who clutched his teddy bear like a lifeline. Connor approached, crouching to their eye level. "You boys doing okay?" Mason nodded, but his voice cracked. "They said they need to run tests. Is our dad going to be okay?" Connor chose his words carefully. "The doctors are taking good care of him. Your dad is tough." The truth was more complicated. The emergency doctor had mentioned possible medication overdose, severe dehydration, and signs of chronic illness. Connor cleared his throat. "Listen, it's getting late. Do you have any family nearby we could call?" Aiden looked up, his eyes wide. "Just Dad. Our Papa David died last year in a car accident." The words hit Connor like a physical blow. Another single father, another car accident. The parallels weren't lost on him. "We don't want to go to foster care," Mason added quickly, a hint of steel beneath the fear. "Dad said that might happen if he ever got sick again." We promised to stay together. Connor made a decision that would alter the course of 3 lives, or rather, 6 lives, counting his own son, Jamie. "Hey," he said softly, "I've got a spare room at my house. My boy Jamie's at his grandmother's for the weekend. You can stay with me until your dad wakes up. Just temporary." "Okay." That night, Connor tucked them into Jamie's bunk beds. He made grilled cheese sandwiches from the last loaf of bread he had, carefully cutting off the burnt edges. As the twins finally drifted to sleep, Connor stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching their small faces soften in the dim light. His phone buzzed a text from his mother asking if Jamie should come home as planned on Sunday. Connor hesitated, then typed, "Yes, but there's been a change of plans. I'll explain later." Sunday morning brought sun and complications. Jamie arrived home to find his private space invaded by 2 strangers. At 11, Jamie was already protective of what little stability remained in his life after losing his other father. Connor watched nervously as the 3 boys sized each other up in the living room. "This is Mason and Aiden," Connor explained, his hand resting on Jamie's shoulder. "They're staying with us for a bit while their dad gets better." Jamie's eyes narrowed slightly. "In my room. Just temporarily," Connor promised. The silence stretched until Aiden noticed the model airplane hanging from Jamie's ceiling. "Did you make that?" Jamie nodded cautiously. "My dad helped. My other dad, Parker, before he died." Something shifted in the atmosphere. Mason stepped forward. "Our Papa David used to build model cars with us before his accident." 4 simple words before his accident created a bridge between them. By evening, Jamie had appointed himself official big brother, showing the twins his collection of models and teaching them how to play his favorite video game. Later, as Connor prepared dinner, stretching his groceries to feed 3 growing boys, he overheard Jamie explaining to the twins, "My dad fixes broken cars. He says sometimes the most important repairs are the ones nobody else sees." Connor paused, spatula in hand, a lump forming in his throat. Even in its brokenness, his small family had made room for more. In the background, a photo of Parker in his Marine uniform seemed to watch approvingly from the wall, next to the American flag Connor had received at the funeral. Some homes are built with hammers and nails. Others are built with grief and grace, creating shelter from the wreckage life leaves behind. Morning sunlight filtered through thin hospital curtains as Connor entered Michael's room. The man looked better than the day before, still pale, but his eyes were alert, focused. The doctor had confirmed what Connor suspected. Michael Evans wasn't just dealing with depression. He had lupus, an autoimmune disease that, combined with grief and financial stress, had created the perfect storm. "You're Connor," Michael said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "The mechanic. The boys told me everything." Connor shifted uncomfortably under Michael's gaze. "They're safe, staying at my place for now." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't think anyone would care if I—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "You're wrong about that," Connor replied, his voice firm but gentle. "Your boys need you, and they're great kids." A nurse entered, checking Michael's vitals and administering medication. After she left, Michael revealed more of his story. He'd been a promising pianist before the twins were born. He and David had adopted the boys as infants, built a life in Nashville surrounded by music and love. Then David's death in a truck accident 18 months ago had shattered everything. The medical bills, the grief, the struggle to manage his lupus while raising 2 traumatized children, it had all become too much. "We moved here 3 months ago," Michael explained. "Cheaper rent, a fresh start, but finding work when you're sick." His voice trailed off. Connor nodded, understanding all too well the economic vulnerability that came with being a single parent. His own auto shop was barely staying afloat, losing customers to the flashier franchise that had opened across town. Some locals had taken their business elsewhere after Parker's death. Uncomfortable with the idea of a gay man raising a child alone, their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock. A well-dressed older woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair entered without waiting for a response. "Mrs. Thornton," head of the neighborhood association, carried a small basket of muffins and an air of authority that filled the small hospital room. "I heard about the Semhoishit story," she announced, eyes scanning Michael critically. "The church ladies put together a little something." Her gaze shifted to Connor. "I didn't realize you were involved." "Mr. West." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Connor recognized the look, the same one he'd received when enrolling Jamie in the local elementary school, judgment wrapped in Southern politeness. "Just helping out a neighbor," Connor replied evenly. Mrs. Thornton placed the basket on the bedside table. "Well, isn't that neighborly? Though I wonder if Child Protective Services might want to evaluate what's best for those little boys. A stable, traditional home environment is so important for children who've experienced trauma." The threat hung in the air like smoke. After she left, Michael looked at Connor with panic in his eyes. "They can't take my boys. They're all I have left." Connor made a decision then, one that defied financial logic and social caution. "Listen, when they discharge you, bring the boys and stay at my place while you recover. It's not much, but there's room. Jamie already likes having them around." Michael studied Connor's face. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Connor thought of Parker, of the promise they'd made when adopting Jamie to create the kind of world where love outweighed fear. "Because someone once did the same for me," he said simply. "And because those boys deserve to stay with their father." What neither man knew was how this temporary arrangement would transform into something neither had dared hope for: a second chance at wholeness. In the heart of Georgia, where tradition ran deep as the red clay soil, an unexpected family was taking root, one that would soon face the full force of a community's prejudice and perhaps its capacity for change. Spring in Georgia brought azaleas, pollen, and whispers that spread through Westview like wildfire. 2 months into their unconventional living arrangement, the small house behind Westside Mechanics had become home to a fragile ecosystem of healing. Michael's health improved enough for him to help around the shop, keeping books while Connor worked on engines. The boys, Jamie, Mason, and Aiden, had formed a tight-knit brotherhood, riding bikes down dusty roads and building elaborate forts in the backyard. But paradise, even a modest one built from broken pieces, rarely remains undisturbed. Business at the garage had slowed to a trickle. Regular customers found excuses to take their vehicles elsewhere after seeing Michael and Connor together with the 3 boys. The rumors weren't subtle, living together in sin, exposing those poor children to their lifestyle. Birds of a feather. Never mind that Connor and Michael maintained separate bedrooms and had formed their arrangement out of necessity rather than romance. The first official blow came on a Tuesday afternoon. A black sedan with government plates parked outside the garage. 2 representatives from Child Protective Services arrived with the clipboards and carefully neutral expressions. "We've received a complaint about the living conditions of Mason and Aiden Evans," the woman explained, showing her credentials. "We need to conduct an evaluation." Connor wiped his hands on a rag, heart pounding. "Michael's at a doctor's appointment. The boys are at school." "Perfect time for a home inspection then," her colleague replied. They examined everything in the shared bedroom where the twins had bunk beds, the refrigerator contents, the medicine cabinet. They asked pointed questions about sleeping arrangements, about Connor's relationship with Michael, about Jamie's adjustment to sharing his home. "Your son seems to have given up a lot of space and privacy," the male caseworker observed. "How's he handling that?" Connor thought of Jamie teaching the twins to change oil filters the previous weekend, his face glowing with pride at being the expert. He's found something he needed more than space. That evening, Connor and Michael sat at the kitchen table after the boys were asleep, facing the possibility that their makeshift family could be torn apart. "They can't find anything wrong with how we're caring for the kids," Connor insisted, though doubt crept into his voice. Michael stared at his hands. "They don't need to. In places like this, families like ours don't get the benefit of the doubt." The CPS evaluation coincided with another blow, the bank's final notice on Connor's business loan. Without more customers, Westside Mechanics would close within 2 months. Everything he'd built, the legacy he'd hoped to pass to Jamie, was slipping away. Help arrived from an unexpected quarter. Pastor Rachel from the Progressive Methodist Church on the edge of town appeared at the garage one afternoon, requesting an oil change. While Connor worked, she spoke. "My congregation hears things," she said carefully. "Not all of Westview thinks alike. Mr. West, some of us believe family comes in many forms." 2 days later, 3 cars from her congregation arrived for service. Then more. A quiet network of support began to form, people who left casseroles on the porch, who invited the boys to birthday parties, who chose kindness over conformity. The true turning point came during the town's 4th of July celebration. The annual barbecue in the park drew everyone in Westview. Connor had planned to keep their family away from the potential hostility, but Pastor Rachel insisted they attend. "Hiding reinforces shame," she said, "and you have nothing to be ashamed of." They arrived as the band was setting up. Mrs. Thornton spotted them immediately, her smile freezing in place as she greeted other neighbors. The tension was palpable until the band's keyboard player suddenly fell ill with heat stroke. "Does anyone play piano?" the frantic event coordinator asked the crowd. Michael, who hadn't touched a keyboard since David's death, found himself volunteering before he could reconsider. His fingers hesitated over the keys for just a moment before music poured forth, not just the patriotic songs on the program, but something deeper, more soulful. The crowd fell silent, watching this pale, quiet man transform before their eyes. When he finished, the applause wasn't just polite, it was genuine. Even Miss Thornton appeared moved despite herself. Later, as fireworks painted the sky in bursts of red and blue, Mason whispered to Connor, "Dad says music can change people's hearts when words can't." Connor looked across the blanket where Michael sat with Jamie and Aiden, pointing at the spectacular display overhead. Perhaps in this small Georgia town, freedom was taking on a new meaning, the freedom to create family from the fragments life leaves behind. Autumn painted the Georgia landscape in amber and gold, marking almost a year since 2 frightened twins had appeared at Westside Mechanics. The transformation was visible everywhere in the thriving auto shop, now booked weeks in advance. In Michael's new piano students, who filled the small house with music each afternoon. In the 3 boys who moved between their rooms like brothers born rather than chosen. The change in the community had begun slowly, then accelerated after Mrs. Thornton's teenage son Tyler crashed his car on a rainy night. Connor had been the one to pull him from the wreckage. Michael had stayed at the hospital with her while Connor repaired the vehicle at cost. Gratitude has a way of softening prejudice. Mrs. Thornton still didn't approve of their arrangement, but she'd stopped making calls to authorities. The CPS case had been closed months ago. The caseworker's final report noted the exceptional stability and nurturing environment provided by both men. When she'd asked Mason if he felt safe, the boy had looked confused by the question. "Connor fixed our family like he fixes cars," he'd replied. "Better than before." On a crisp October evening, Connor sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching Michael help Aiden practice piano through the window. Jamie and Mason were assembling a model airplane at the kitchen table, their heads bent together in concentration. The scene struck Connor with such unexpected beauty that his chest tightened. "They look like they've always belonged together," came a voice from the steps. Pastor Rachel stood there, holding a folder. "The paperwork you asked about," she said, handing it to him, "for the joint adoption. It won't be easy, but I know a judge who believes in family, however it comes together." Connor nodded, emotion making speech difficult. What had begun as temporary shelter had transformed into something neither he nor Michael had dared imagine: a second chance, a rebuilt home on a stronger foundation. Inside, Michael looked up and caught Connor's eye through the window. The smile they shared held more than friendship, more than the partnership of co-parents. Over months of late-night conversations, shared burdens, and the slow healing of parallel griefs. Something else had blossomed, tentative at first, then undeniable. 1 year after that desperate day, They gathered at the community center for a benefit concert organized by Pastor Rachel. Michael performed publicly for the first time since David's death, his music telling the story words never could have lost: resilience and unexpected joy. When he finished, the three boys rushed the stage, followed by Connor, who carried a small box. In front of their community, some supportive, some still uncomfortable, but present nonetheless. Connor knelt beside Michael at the piano. "We've fixed what was broken," he said softly, opening the box to reveal two simple gold bands. "All of us, together." The adoption papers would be signed the following month, making official what their hearts already knew: family isn't determined by blood or convention, but by who stays when the world falls apart and who helps rebuild from the wreckage. Have you ever found healing in unexpected places or discovered family beyond blood? Sometimes the most powerful repairs happen not in garages, but in hearts brave enough to remain open after breaking. Share your story of unconventional healing in the comments below, and subscribe to Heart Stories for more journeys of courage, compassion, and the family we choose.